That woman who said, I eat uncertainty for breakfast, no, she doesn't. She eats granola because she carries that with her as a little island of certainty to balance out the uncertainty elsewhere in her life.
We don't know how to do this. Like, we're not taught how to deal with uncertainty.
I think it's probably the most important capability one could develop for our modern era.
Like a light switch, it's a mindset shift of just seeing possibility instead of the fearful, only the unknown.
The Money Talk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth with Kim Parlee.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kim Parlee, and welcome to the Money Talk Podcast. Today, we are tackling uncertainty. And you are not alone if you are feeling pretty uncertain about what is happening in the world right now. If we just take a look at some of the headlines, our economy, geopolitics, trade, AI, markets, climate, and that's just the macro stuff. And then you think about yourself, your own family, career, health, getting older, your retirement, your kids, their future, what's going to happen. Here's a stat from the authors of the book we're about to speak about right now, and this is the quote. There is no linear route forward in a world where up to 65% of elementary school-age children may work in jobs that don't even exist yet. So how does one survive in this uncertainty? Or maybe the better question is, how does one thrive in this uncertainty? Joining me right now from France, we have Nathan Furr and Susanna Harmon-Furr. They are co-authors of The Upside of Uncertainty, A Guide to Finding Possibility and the Unknown. It is great to have you both with us.
It's great to get to chat with you about uncertainty.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. I should give people a little bit of background, too, before we start, Nathan and Susanna. Nathan is a professor of strategy at INSEAD, author of 5 books, and a sought-after person to speak about in strategy, innovation, technology. Susanna, entrepreneur, designer, art historian. She founded a women's clothing line and interior design firm. They're partners in real life. They share 4 children. Congratulations. That in itself is a big accomplishment, my friends. I want to start with, why did you write this book? Did you know what was coming?
Well, I've been studying uncertainty, innovation, technology for about 25 years. So I started my career in industry. I worked in real companies. I decided I wanted to really understand what drives what. So I went back and did my PhD at Stanford. And I've been interviewing some of the great innovators and change makers for these past few decades. And one thing I noticed is that they were really good at taking risks. They were good at stepping into the unknown. And I never felt very comfortable with uncertainty. And I could see very clearly that it was essential to take the risk to achieve something new. I wanted to understand how. How do we do that better? And so over these past few decades, we were interviewing these folks and asking them, what are the tools you used to navigate the good and the bad uncertainty?
Susanna, why were you passionate about this book as well? Like, what was your reason for wanting to do this?
Yes. So I actually decided to join Nathan on the book after many of the interviews had been done while he was at Stanford and had access to all these amazing entrepreneurs. And I was actually trying to be a little fledgling entrepreneur. I had a different lens on the topic. Also, as a mother, as someone who liked to take on change and be on the frontier of cool stuff, I knew that uncertainty was where all the magic is. I knew that uncertainty was the way to evolve, to change, to grow, to have new things happen. And in our relationship, Nathan is the more risk-averse one. We'll talk about that later. The one who is, and you kind of need that, someone who really understands, like, whoa, let's map out everything and figure out what we can know about this. And when I saw him starting on this book, I just said, ooh, let's do this together. Let's write this book to the human inside the manager. So yes, a business book with lots of business examples. But again, uncertainty hits us first in our amygdala, in our reptile brain that's terrified of uncertainty. Let's speak to that human part of us that needs to realize it's okay to fear it and talk to that human person who is going to have to navigate it.
I think it's a really interesting point because, and I should mention, here's the book. I hold it up, dog-eared. It's got a few post-it notes kind of all the way through it. But, organizations, we're fundamentally human. So if you understand the human, you're going to understand how the organization functions at the same time. And the one thing that you mentioned, Nathan, that I really thought was interesting is that, we don't know how to do this. Like, we're not taught how to deal with uncertainty. And what I thought was interesting is, and we'll get into it, you've got tools, you tell people how to think about it. But, we're taught, to your point, like, math, biology, all the things in school, but we're not taught how to deal with this. And even though maybe perhaps not only are we not taught, but we have some really bad habits that actually make it hard for us to navigate this stuff.
That's spot on. I really like how the former CEO of Ben & Jerry's put it. He said, the world now is ambiguity and paradox. Now, he said this like 5 years ago, pre-COVID, right? So imagine how much ambiguity and paradox everybody is wrestling with since that period. He said, for people who like the linear route forward, life is getting harder and harder in any field. And I think that's the essence of it, because I don't know about you, but I was taught the linear route forward. I never had a class on how to navigate uncertainty. Maybe I got a little bit of wisdom from my parents here and there, but the research is very clear on this, that when we have low tools, we actually fall into these maladaptive traps. We get anxious, we ruminate, meaning we think about it, we overreact, we get rigid. And so I wanted to understand this deeper. So I went out, I thought, surely us researchers and academics have figured this out. And it was kind of a good news, bad news story. The good news was that it was very clear that you could learn these skills, and that people who have learned these skills, they're better entrepreneurs, they're better managers, they're better strategists, all this great stuff, right? But the bad news is there was very limited work on how. How do I get better? And so that was the thrust of our work, interviewing great innovators, change makers, designers, artists, even paramedics, people from many walks of life to understand the how.
People think of it as probably maybe more a soft skill. And what I got from the book is that this is not a soft, this is a hard skill. Like, this is something that you actually need to do and practice.
I think it's probably the most important capability one could develop for our modern era. We call it uncertainty ability, or the ability to lead yourself and others through the uncertainty to the possibility on the other side. And we forget how essential that is. But if you look back in history at great leaders, you'll see they all had this characteristic. I mean, for example, pull one out of a hat. People love to talk about Winston Churchill as a great leader. Well, if you'd looked at his resume before he became, the great leader we knew him as during World War II, you wouldn't have picked him. I mean, the guy failed out of, his elementary training. He barely got into military academy. His father wrote him off as waste. He had many debacles in his, political journey. But what made him, why do we call him a great leader today? Because in a moment of greatest uncertainty, he had a vision that victory was possible, and he could lead people there. And so I see this as such an essential characteristic for leaders, but also for yourself. I mean, we have all spent a lot of time worrying about some uncertainty. And so the fundamental question is, how do I take that energy that's going into that worry, and how do I transform that into productivity, into courage, into resilience?
I want to get into some of the tools. I'm just not going to get there quite yet. I want to go back to the human side for a second, Susanna, because the thing that really appealed to me too is somebody, I talk a lot with folks about investing and personal finance, and I'm a big believer in that there are principles that we adhere to, but everybody has their own tactics and everyone does the things their own way. And you guys said it brilliantly. I think there's 42 tools in this book, but they're not for everybody. Some people are going to gravitate more to others than other ones.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, people sometimes think, oh no, do I have to know all of these and know exactly what order? Absolutely not. We often even say just open to a chapter and get reading. But yeah, the 42 tools are there because we know some will resonate and to others and some won't. And we do have our kind of best of that we'll probably end up talking about. But it is a personal experience. And even with risk, as I was saying earlier, Nathan's risk averse, but that doesn't mean he's risk averse in everything. We tend to think risk averse means you're bad at all risk. You never take risk. No, it's more that we have things that we're good at. And so we just don't even see it as doing something great because we're just used to doing that kind of uncertainty. So yeah, it's really exciting to really just let people know, look, there's something in here for you. You don't have to do them all. And yeah, I think the most important thing, as Nathan was talking about, how it's really that it is a daily practice, and it is a mind, like a light switch. It's a mindset shift of just seeing possibility instead of the fearful, only the unknown. And yeah.
I was going to say, well, then let's just dive in, because I want to get into it, because I had a bunch of questions I was going to ask you, and now I just want to go straight to straight to it. I think because part of it, I think, is also, I wanted to find out more about who you talk to and those types of things, but I think so much of this is in the examples of actually how you do this stuff. So in the book, the 40 tool techniques, you have something called a cross. And you have 4 sections, essentially, and I'm probably oversimplifying it a little bit. But the first one you talk about is reframing. And maybe at a high level, and maybe with an example, if you wouldn't mind, is like, how do you think about reframing if I'm dealing with something that's some, say, personal uncertainty?
Sure. I'd love to talk about that. So reframing it really does come out of academic research. And the idea is basically that the way we describe something, so the way we think about it, what we frame it as, will choose how we think, feel, and act. It will change everything. So Nathan, why don't you go ahead and tell the really academic version, and then I'll give a more personal example of how this works.
Well, actually, I want to lay a really critical foundation here, because we live in deeply uncertain times, and it seems really provocative to call the book The Upside of Uncertainty, because I think most people are feeling, oh, it's all downside, right?
Yeah, and you don't want to be Pollyannish about it, right? Like that's the thing.
Exactly. We don't want to be toxic positivity or something. But here's the key thing: we really deal with 2 types of uncertainty. The first is that we observe that any innovation, any change, any transformation that we celebrate is always preceded by uncertainty. So Marie Curie, only person in the world to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different fields. When she couldn't even go to university in her native Poland as a woman. And when she emigrated to France, it wasn't even clear she would have food to eat, let alone study her passion. So she had to go through that all that uncertainty. And so the first principle is that uncertainty and possibility are 2 sides of the same coin. And we have to go through the uncertainty to get to the possibility. And this is very hard. I work with senior executives all the time. They ask for innovation, but the moment it comes time to face a little uncertainty, they want to back out. And I have to tell them, you're not going to get the growth and innovation without taking some of that risk. Now, but let's acknowledge that's uncertainty you choose when you do something new. There's a second kind that is happening to many of us, and that's the stuff we didn't choose. Something like COVID, a war, economic ups and downs, policy changes. No, nobody would choose that stuff, and we're not saying that's good, but we're saying the key issue in that unplanned uncertainty is that now that life has dealt you this hand of cards, the key question is, what's the possibility that is attached? So say COVID. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, though, I 100% agree with that. Is like your ability to generate that in the moment is what's going to have you see what's out there. It's hard. If you're going through something really, really hard, you can't just switch and go like that's the thing I guess I hope we'll get into is like how.
Yeah. So exactly. So that's where this reframing comes in. So 42 tools, a lot of tools to really, we organized those 42 tools on 4 categories. The first is reframing. And as Susanna mentioned, it's based in this research in behavioral economics and psychology that the way you describe something changes how you think, decide, and act. And the very famous experiment that demonstrated this, it was Kahneman and Tversky. They won the Nobel Prize for this work. They gave people a situation. They said, there's a disease, and you have a choice of 2 treatments. Treatment A has a 90% chance of success, and treatment B has a 10% chance of failure. Now, I'm simplifying a bit, but the point is they're statistically identical. So, of course, everybody it splits 50-50 what people choose. No, not at all. In fact, the vast majority of people choose 90% chance of success treatment because we have been wired by evolution to be gain-seeking, meaning we want to win. We go towards it, and we are loss averse. We don't want to lose. We run away from the loss. And this is so important for uncertainty because if indeed uncertainty and possibility are two sides of the same coin, and for folks in our area, no risk, no reward, we know this. If you're always framing in terms of the uncertainty side of the coin, what you're doing is you're triggering people's loss aversion versus if you're focusing, you can acknowledge the crisis, but if you also focus on the possibility side of the coin, then you start to trigger that gain seeking. And I know, Susanna, you have a lot of great stories about this. Maybe you'd share one of those.
Yeah, so I love the reframing, and I understand absolutely it is hard to just shift from that fear moment, from that discouragement and despair. And yet the research shows in our own personal examples, we can now kind of feel like even when we want to be mad for a little bit too long, we know like it's in my power right now to just at least start looking for something better. And so the one example I'll give is it was actually right when we were doing final edits of this book. And we have 4 kids and they're actually adults. They're 20 to 26. So they're older now. But probably about 5 years ago, things got in a really rough patch for us. It was COVID. One of our kids wasn't allowed into France because he'd lost his long stay visa in France. So we could not get to him. And he is also transgender, which was a very hard thing for us to know how to handle. We were kind of on that first wave of that occurrence that's now we understand so much better. We didn't handle it perfectly, but we also had a child who was going through a very severe mental health crisis. He'd had a manic episode linked to COVID. I'm going really deeply personal, but honestly, it was grim. It was scary. This kid now was in the depressive phase. And we were together on a trip that we could not cancel, like this really fun trip that was supposed to be the celebration of the culmination of our book. And here we had the reframe tool. We had all the 42 and we were feeling really dejected. And Nathan said to me, I don't know how to reframe this moment because we had this depressed child with us who was in all black hoodie, high tops, heat of France. Like we were like, is he going to die under these sweatshirts? Like we didn't know what to do. It was very sad. His eyes not listening to music, which is his favorite thing. He's an artist. And Nathan said, you know what? I just had a reframe appear to me in my mind. And I was like, please share it. Because we had one kid who couldn't even come home and didn't really want to because he was mad at us that we were misgendering him and not doing perfect on that front. And this depressed kid and our 2 little girls who were kind of just being perfect because they couldn't do anything else because they knew their parents were maxed out. And he said, what if as parents, our job is to be like a diving board in the middle of the ocean? Because we were on this beautiful seaside French place feeling depressed. And so I'm picturing this with him. And he said, our kids, we have to be solid in our love for them and careful with what they need, but also know that they're going to jump off and do stuff. And we just have to keep telling them we're here for you and we love you. And I was like, keep talking. And anyway, I'm not kidding when I say, literally, it shifted how we felt about all of our kids because, again, we knew just in our bedrock hearts that, yes, loving them is the most important. We can't control their choices. We can't even control their mental health. We can give them the doctors and help them get the meds. But at a certain point, our love and our fierce trust in them, and if we can get that across to them, then maybe we'd have a hope. And our son actually, like within 3 days, turned a corner. And I don't want to say it was because we had this thing, but who knows? What if the magic of our putting our fear down? Because as parents too, sometimes when you're so worried about a kid that's in distress, you actually are kind of undoing, they sense it. Like even though he was out of it, I think he was so worried that how worried we were about him. And within days, he felt a lot better. He was doing better, which was weird because it had been months. And this oldest child now, looking back 4 years later, our kids want to hang out with us way too much. Like this reframe of parents being the sturdy, vast diving board that can let them jump and swim back and we're always here for them, basically loving them, which is like, no duh. We're like, dang, we thought we were open nest. Again, open nest is a frame that I love more than empty nest because kids do come back. But it's such a beautiful open nest now. And they trust us in a way and we feel less pressure. And we're doing so much a better job of navigating raising adult kids. And I would say, I think parents of teenagers even, you have more control over what they can do. But if you can remember, I'm just supposed to be a solid anchor to loving them and trusting them more. it's kind of powerful. So again, that would be a reframe from we suck at parenting and our fun, all the work we put into these little cute kids is gone and blown up. Look, when we believed that, we were also tanking ourselves and we didn't have any energy in that place.
It's so powerful as a mom. I feel you. I hear it, and I love it. It's when you reframe, you're redefining what success is. I do want to ask, like, is there a muscle like this is because this is something. It's a skill, and any advice on if you've never done this, how do you start?
It's a great point. This is one of these paradoxical things about leading and uncertainty and managing uncertainty and navigating it. Is it's both a light switch and a muscle. So it is something that you develop like a muscle over time and you get better. And the great news is because we all lived through COVID, you've got some of that muscle already. But there is an element to it, which is in the moment, you can light switch it. And that is to say, how do I reframe this right now in terms of this is the place, this is where the opportunity is. And one of the tools we talk about in reframing is frontiers. The frontier is the boundary between what we know and what we don't know. And most people stay far back from the frontier. But what these innovators and change makers do differently is they frame the frontier as the place where they can do their best work. And so what I would say to apply it right now would be to say, take an uncertainty you have. For example, I was working with a company, they were going to go through a reorganization to become a matrix organization. Or maybe in your work, there's, some shuffle that's happening. And to ask yourself, listen, I acknowledge you would prefer things stayed the way they were. That's fair. But now that life has dealt you this hand of cards, how could this be the frontier where you do your best work? So, for example, with the company going to a matrix organization, many people doubting would it even work. I said, hey, this is an opportunity to learn how to do an organization change. This is an opportunity to learn what works and what doesn't work. And so that's that light switch moment where you suddenly trigger that gain-seeking part of your thinking and you can move forward with more energy.
I'd love to just add one more thought about just the way our brains are wired. We love this marine biologist, Ayana Johnson, because she just wrote a book, but her whole framing of the climate crisis is to just ask a different question. And it's the title of her book, and it is, what if we get this right? Because let's face it, we spend so much time in the doomsday, like, oh no, now this is extinct and this thing happened and this oil spill, and we get so stressed. And she said, we need to stay in that regenerative, positive, looking forward, like, what would it even look like to get it right? And she asks this on panels with other experts, and they're just dumbfounded. No one has any answer because we're not preparing for the idea that it could go well. Humans could be brilliant and we could figure this out. And so I think that's another way with the light switch in the moment. If you're really feeling like I am not up to this task, you might need to flop in that cross you mentioned. We call it the first aid cross for uncertainty. You might need to flip down to the sustain tools. And the only reason I'm doing this is because they're very similar to reframe tools. They're cognitive. They're the moment, though, where you're helping yourself stay on the horse. So they're like, you remember, like, oh yeah, why am I doing this in the first place? And you kind of are giving yourself fuel to stay in the game, to feel empowered. But honestly, just asking, like, what if I can do this? And then kind of trying to imagine what it would look like. That's like one of those really positive mindset things that can work.
I love that. It's fun. One of my little tricks I do for myself sometimes, I have a feed of my what I call happy science stories when I kind of get in a weird mood. And I was taking a look at, you hear how drones are being used for, I'll say defense purposes today. They had a story of drones dropping around the world, like shooting trees into the ground as tree planters. And they could plant like 20,000 trees. And it was just like, oh my gosh, they're getting it right, to your point. So that was, it's exciting. Okay. So I love that. So, okay, we talked about one side of the cross and we talked about the reframe. Should we go to sustain? We also have prime and do. Maybe you tell me where the natural thing to go next is.
I think we can come back to it. When we come back to it later, it will make sense why I brought it up. Because again, we kind of say that the north-south axis in that first aid cross is the cognitive. It's where you're using your mind more, and we should flip into prime because prime and do being on that horizontal axis, those are the things where you start to take action.
All right.
And so prime, we call it prime because we like that notion of like a primer on a wall of paint, or you prime a pump. It's the stuff you can do even before the uncertainty is happening. Or if it is already happening, it's the stuff you do to prepare yourself to go into it with more calm and resolve and resilience. And a prime tool that's really helpful, I'll just throw it out there, is knowing your risks. And I mentioned earlier, and Nathan, tell the story about Tina, because I think it's a really helpful one for folks.
That's a good one. So this is in the early days of the research. I was doing my PhD at Stanford in Silicon Valley, and you got to understand the heroes of Silicon Valley are not nerdy professors like me. They're the entrepreneurs changing the world. And at the time, we had 4 kids. Susanna was starting a clothing line that was really consuming cash, not generating it. We were living on student loans. And I was really down on myself because I was feeling that if I had any courage, I would go start a business. And one of my mentors there, Tina Seelig, who's a professor at Stanford, a neuroscientist, took me out to lunch very generously and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I said to Tina, I said, "Well, if I had any courage, I would go start a business, but I'm not a risk taker." And she said, "What do you mean you're not a risk taker? Do you really think there's only one kind of risk?" And I kind of, "What do you mean, Tina?" She said, "In my view, there's financial risk, there's social risk, there's intellectual risk, there's emotional risk, and we could go on." And as somebody, the solo income earner with this huge family in tow and an entrepreneur who's still trying to get the wheels going, I understand that you don't want to take on any more financial risk, but you seem like somebody who's willing to take a social and intellectual risk. And what she was trying to teach me in that moment is that self-knowledge is really powerful. And if we understand where we have an aversion, that's a space where we need to fortify or get creative. So one of my favorite interviews was with David Heinemeier Hansson, one of the world's great entrepreneurs, hates financial risk. So if you hate financial risk, how in the world do you be an entrepreneur? Well, he said, "I always had a consulting gig that paid the bills on the side, kept my expenses low while I was doing the next venture so I could feel calm." So you want to kind of fortify where you have an aversion. And by contrast, you want to, where you have an affinity, like for me, it was intellectual and social, you want to step into those because that's, again, how you pull out the opportunity in your best work. So what I realized at that moment, oh my gosh, being a professor is actually perfect because I can kind of pat down that financial risk and I can take these intellectual risks. And the only kind of caveat I would give to that whole thing is that you should be careful as you think about your natural risk affinities and aversions, that what's most important to you isn't being cut short by an aversion. And I'll give you an example. My whole family loves this television show, Downton Abbey. It's this, kind of aristocratic English family. And I hate that show. And the reason why I hate that show is because the premise is always the same. At the beginning of the episode, if only so-and-so told so-and-so, "I love you," it would all be well. But instead, they have this emotional risk aversion. They never say it. And the rest of the episode is this slow moving train wreck. And so we want to, for both individuals and couples and even organizations, be really thoughtful and say, like David Heinemeier Hansson, he wanted to be an entrepreneur. He wanted to create something new. But if he just said, "I don't like financial risk," he would have never made the huge breakthroughs and innovations he did. So he had to be creative about, how do I work with my self-knowledge to access the things that are most important to me?
On that self-knowledge piece, though, and because I 100%, it's so interesting. We have our own filters, to your point, which I think is as much of what you're saying. So how do you know? How do you know that when you're saying, like, perhaps, you think, "Oh, I'm not very good at this," when actually you are. You just actually don't have an accurate view of yourself.
That's huge. And I think, so what we do is we recommend people do fill out one of those spider graphs and then maybe share it with someone else and say, like, "Do you think the way I have rated myself feels right?" Because it can be really helpful to have someone say, like Tina with Nathan said, well, Nathan, there's not only one kind. So first off, I love this story because it opens up the world of there's tons of risk. And we might be so good at one of those like things. We might have an affinity for one of those risk zones that to us, we don't even see it as risky. So get with someone who will fill theirs out and talk about it. We actually did this with our kids. And as a family, you can realize, hey, wait a second. You're so good at that. Like our youngest is the best at going into the French stores and buying, like doing a haggling situation or taking something back. She's not scared of talking to people and, butchering the language. And that's pretty awesome because she's the youngest. So you can also kind of team up and say, will you do this thing for me? Nathan and I do this all the time. It's like, whose card is this? Whose risk affinity is better for this? But you also want to stretch yourself. But to your point that like, if we're feeling too critical of ourselves, then we're holding ourselves back. So get a real read from someone else and say, hey, what do you think? And if they do say, actually, I think you're even maybe less comfortable in this kind of zone, that's helpful too, because then you can think, really? Okay, well, how could I take little baby steps? Because the reality isn't that we need to be a perfect circle of risk. What we're saying is chart yourself, and where you're really not bugged with a risk zone, you would put your circle way out to the end. Everyone's is going to look different.
I'll let people know too, and then they can see if with the book. But the risks you have are financial, emotional, social, physical, intellectual, and political. Just so people kind of know the ones that you're talking about.
So Susanna's referencing this tool we call the Riskometer, and it's in the book. But you've listed those 6 zones, so you could do this for yourself on a piece of paper. But I got to just share one of my other favorite Prime tools because it's so useful for all of us. We call it uncertainty balancers. And one of the things that was so shocking in talking to these folks is they would say very provocative things about uncertainty. They would say things like, I love uncertainty.
These are the entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Entrepreneurs, innovators, creators. One woman we interviewed said, I eat uncertainty for breakfast. I was like, holy smokes, you're intense. Not me, But here's the thing. I was trained in qualitative research, and you do this courtroom style questioning, you dig deep, and what you find is that's what they say to you on the front stage of their life. But on the back stage of their life, the part you and I can't see, you discover all these weird, curious habits. So they will sit on the same seat of the plane. They will stay in the same hotel room. They'll wear the same clothes. That woman who said, I eat uncertainty for breakfast? No, she doesn't. She eats granola, and she eats the exact same granola wherever she goes in the world because she carries that with her as a little island of certainty to balance out the uncertainty elsewhere in her life. And so what I would say is, like, for all of us, I would challenge you to say, if you're feeling a lot of uncertainty, guess what? Nobody, not even the most innovative person you can imagine, has infinite capacity for uncertainty. What you need to bring in is uncertainty balancers, little islands of certainty to kind of create calm and comfort. And those are routines, habits, and ritual. That's a big one. Number 2, outsourcing and simplification. Take some things off your plate. Number 3, humor. Gallows humor is remarkably powerful for shaking off some of the anxiety. And number 4, and most important, relationships and communities. Reach out to other people. And it doesn't have to be, like Susanna and I have been married 29 years. It can be communities of people, similar interests, teams at work. It can be anything, but that's how we balance the uncertainty so that we have the resilience to go through it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, uncertainty everywhere is just chaos. And nobody wants chaos. I almost think of it as a budget. You can spend it over here. I want to spend it in my entrepreneurial activities, but I'm the same. I have the same cereal, and I do like to have a regular wardrobe so that we can just do those things. You don't want to worry about those things. Is there anything else? So we've done reframe and prime. I was going to move on to do, but should I? Is there anything left in I know there's lots left in prime, but should we move on to do?
I think we should move on to do.
Okay, so back to the connection to the emotional side you were talking about, Susanna. Tell us a bit about do then.
Yeah, so the do is that now it's the moment of like, just do it. You're ready. You've primed it. You've reframed it. And really, truly, when there is uncertainty, one of the best ways to have a say in what happens is to take action. Because if you don't do anything, that's also choosing something, right? If we do nothing, someone else is going to. So the do tools are very, there's a grand array variety. Some are more basic, like you would learn in a business school class about taking small steps, doing things, not thinking, I've got to take all the uncertainty on right now, but really being methodical and thoughtful about it. I guess I'll start with one of my more humanistic goals, and is it actually humanistic tools, which is what we called values versus goals. And the idea is that goals are great. We're taught all to like set a goal and you might be able to attain it. Whereas if you don't set any goal, you might fall short of something that you could have done. So we are not saying don't have goals, but often when we set a goal, it's an outlier thing that we have less control over than we might want to think. So as a startup person, this Meyer Hansen, actually, the guy that Nathan was just talking about, he's the one who really told us this idea too, that honestly, we often think like if we have a projection for a company to earn 10 million after its first year, that's really out of our hands. But what we can do is be guided by the values. And so for him, his values were to write great software, to deal with his team in a great way. So during the summer, they only do a 4-day work week because he wants them to have that extra day for a weekend, which is pretty cool if you think about it. And then the third thing is to act ethically in the market. So software, teams treated well, an ethical market. And he said, guess what? After 2 years of trying to build something, if it's a flop, we will feel good in our company because we will have kept our values. It's kind of radical if you think about it. So this is similar. You could think about this as a parent. Again, that moment when we reframed what our job was, we could have kind of been going for the goals like, wait, we wanted all of our kids to graduate from Ivy League schools by 21 or 22. Those things are out of our hands. And even with our companies, they're out of our hands. So how do we create values as a marker that we don't have to fail on? Actually, in fact, you can think about it this way, and this is the provocative way to say it, but can you go through uncertainty and not fail? If you're going on values, you can.
And I just got to jump here and say, it sounds abstract, but actually when we peel under the surface of some of the most successful companies I've studied, I would say Amazon.com, Jeff Bezos would say the reason we were successful is our value was customer obsession. Where I spoke with the chairman of I spoke with the chairpeople of some big companies during the COVID crisis, companies like Novo Nordisk that made the first GLP-1, or BP. And they said the exact same thing to me. They said, in the moments of great uncertainty, political and economic uncertainty, the thing that allowed us to cut through the fog and the murk was we made decisions according to our values. And the funny thing is the research actually supports, there's research in organizational behavior that shows that when you act from this place of values, you actually perform better. They do experiments where they'd have people calling up and asking for donations. And if they did it based on their values, they were much more successful at getting donations than when they were just going after a goal. So what are these kind of paradoxical things?
It's great. And I actually, you mentioned fog. It was one of my favorite examples that you had, chapter 21 in your book that you talked about. I think, and I'm going to say it wrong, it's Martin van de Brink. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. So he talks about, leading in the semi industry and saying it's foggy and dark. A few folks with red lights ahead of you, using analogy of driving behind cars, but then you get ahead. And, there are no more lights in front and you have no clue what to do. How do you navigate through the fog? And I think that's when I even think about a lot of business right now, too, in terms of what they're thinking about where things are going. I mean, there's just so much change.
There's so much change. And that fog, how do you cut through that foggy environment? And I'll just maybe throw out a little puzzle for you that will provide the answer. So let's imagine right now that, everyone listening to us, we have a bonus for them. They get 10 million whatevers, wherever they are in the world, to start it. But there's a caveat. They have to create a startup accelerator. And a startup accelerator like Y Combinator is a kind of well-known form now where you have a 3-month program. You have entrepreneurs who come in at the beginning of the 3-month program. They get mentoring, training, conversations with mentors and customers. And at the end, there's a demo day where they try to get funding. So that's the task. What's the best way to design this 3 months experience? So, for example, should you have the entrepreneurs talk to the customers, mentors, and investors right up front, cram it all together, literally like 100 conversations in a month. That's a little overwhelming, right? So maybe you should spread it out over the 3 months so they have time to absorb it. That's puzzle number one. Puzzle number two, sometimes folks inside the accelerator, they have competitors or potential competitors there. So should you force them to talk to potential competitors, or should you allow them to be a little bit more stealth and only talk to people who aren't competitive? And number three, sometimes these conversations are with people that appear very relevant on the surface, and sometimes the conversations may feel like, why am I talking to this person? Yeah, they're in a totally different industry. So should you make a standard program so you have to talk to everybody, even the ones that don't seem relevant, or customize it? And, the answers aren't immediately relevant, but there's a body of research on this that gives us the right answer. And that is a clue into how to learn through the fog. And the right answer is that the primary challenge we have in uncertainty is we settle on what we think is the right answer too early. And so the best way out of that, the best way to learn through the fog is to, number one, talk to as many people as quickly as possible, right up front, just cram it all in. Number two, don't be afraid of talking to your competitors. In fact, most of the time, they have really good insights about similar problems, but they're working on their own thing, so they're not going to steal your idea. And number three, talk to everybody, even people you don't think are relevant, because as it turns out, sometimes the people you thought weren't relevant have some really interesting puzzle for you. And so as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's working at any aspect of your life, I would say, talk to as many people as possible, talk to people who are different than you, and talk to people who are wrestling with similar problems. And how does this tie back to that Martin van den Brink? So a lot of people won't know that name, but they've used the tools. So Martin van den Brink is CTO of a company called ASML. They make all the chips in your phones and computers possible. And he led a decade-long radical innovation leap. I mean, billions of dollars. So imagine the stress of leading this uncertain project. You're spending billions, your board is challenging you, the media is challenging you, everybody, and you're creating a radical leap that nobody's made before, nobody even believes is possible. And it's extreme ultraviolet lithography. And the fascinating thing about him is he said, I never pretend I'm right.
Mhm.
I always say, here's what I'm thinking. Tell me what I'm missing. And that's the guy leading this project. And that exhibits that openness, is what we call cognitive flexibility. You need the courage just enough courage to take the next step, and just enough doubt to listen to other voices that may be signaling a better path.
That's so great. And there's so much goodness in that too, because also when you're providing that kind of piece of feedback, you're giving something for people to react to, which then it's a constant, he just information gathering that you can take as you're doing things. So that's probably why he did so well. So there you go. So, okay.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, like I said, I could keep going, but I do want to talk about the fourth section. So we've done reframe, prime, do, and now the most important thing, maintain. So maybe give us some context on how we think about sustain and maintain momentum.
Sure. So sustaining ourselves, we love that word because it's really about, what is a sustaining thing? It's a support, and in uncertainty, it's going to go wrong. We wish we could say, like, if you do all the tools, everything is going to go your way, but it just isn't going to. And yet what we will also remind you is that in that uncertainty going differently, it might be better than what you were planning for yourself. So sometimes the failure becomes the oh my gosh, the dream, right? We just can't know. But it's helpful to have a few tools for when things are going wrong. And maybe one of the most powerful is a group of tools under this idea of frustration management. Those are things where you are able to see the failure as what have I learned from this? Or gratitude frame. It's where you think, well, what do I still have? And I'm racing through these because I think maybe one of our very favorite best of tools comes from Martin Seligman. So positive psychology, the founder of that idea, he gives us what he called learned optimism. And he really debunked the idea that we're born either an optimist or pessimist. And it's just sorry, folks, you're just one and that's all you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. He basically showed us that No, it's something that you probably a little bit maybe genetic, but more where you've learned how to explain stuff that happens. And the learned optimists are ones who, when something bad happens to them, they see it as temporary, so that it's not going to be there forever, not personal, and also that it's very specific. So it just affects that one thing of their life. So, how can you do the change? And basically, he talks about it. You have to dispute that negative belief. When those thoughts start going through your head, unfortunately, when something's in our brain, we kind of think it's true. It just feels like data. But he's like, no, get it outside of yourself. Even write it down. Talk to a person. If you're saying, I am a terrible leader because I let this thing happen, what you would do instead of say, wait a minute, this isn't my fault. Nathan, tell the example of the grocery retailer.
Actually, I was thinking about entrepreneurs, and I
Okay.
was thinking about how what makes Silicon Valley so different is how they treat failure. So there are regions of the world where I get to work where if you fail as an entrepreneur, the entrepreneurs interpret it exactly the wrong way. They make it permanent. Like, I'll always have this black mark on my career. It's personal. It's my fault.
No one will invest in me again. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I love one of the great, Randy Komisar is a very famous investor in Silicon Valley. And he used to tell this joke. He'd say, what do we call a failed entrepreneur in Silicon Valley? A serial entrepreneur, which is, of course, a term of, a praise, right? But he means it really seriously. He said, the way we treat failure in Silicon Valley is the secret to our success is fundamentally different. And so what he's doing in that moment is he's using humor to say, hey, let's make that failure temporary. Okay, so guess what? That project didn't work, but the next one probably will. Isolated. You know what? You're a smart person. You're a great parent. You're a great partner. You're a great friend, whatever it may be. Other aspects of you are good and celebratory. And lastly, it's not your fault. It's impersonal. And it's the situation. It's the context. We all know serendipity and timing have a ton to do with that. And when you interpret a setback that way, what happens is you're energized and ready to go to the next thing. And I did this with a woman who was recently put in as a CEO of a big retailer, and it was with all the economic turbulence, results were bad, and she was so down, and she was interpreting it as personal, permanent, and pervasive. And all I did was what Susanna said: dispute the belief. I said, hey, guess what? Economic cycles, they go up, they go down. It's down now, it'll come up. So I was making it temporary. And I said, and is every aspect of the business bad? And she said, well, there's some bright spots. And if she said yes, I would have said, but you're a great parent or you're a great person. I would have made it isolated. And then lastly, I said, and guess what? You didn't make this recession. You just got put in as CEO. You couldn't have planned for it. You're doing the best you can. So I was making it impersonal. And I'm telling you, as I did this, as I disputed the belief with her, I watched her face brighten up, like sunshine had come out on it. And that's what it does. We have to do that for ourselves, and we have to do that for those around us.
Yeah, I think I love that too, because I've always, talked to people. It's kind of like, here's what happened and here's what you made it mean. Choose something different, right? Like that's kind of the whole figure out how you can go forward. I guess as a final, just to wrap up, I mean, there's so much, and I should let people know, we've touched on a little bit. There's, 36, 37 odd other tools that we haven't even touched on yet that are inside the book. But if someone was to listen or take one thing away from this, what would you say is the most important thing? Suzanne, I'll start with you.
My whole goal in joining Nathan in this book was to encourage people, really give them the hope that they can be good at uncertainty, that they really can. And it's not like in 5 years, it's like starting today with just some of those basic, like, what if I get this right? What are my values? And kind of leading yourself through it with some of this more nuanced way instead of like, we're all doomed.
I've interviewed so many innovators and entrepreneurs and, change makers that really have done amazing things. And sometimes people ask me, Nathan, do you think they're just wired differently? And I have to acknowledge that, if we look at the field of applied neuroscience, the running kind of agreement is that everything in life is a function of three things. Yes, genes matter. Number two, experience. What happened to you matters. But number three, learning is huge. And I think what they have done is that they have learned that although sometimes they take a risk, it doesn't work out. Most of the time when they make a smart, calculated risk, not only does it work out, but it's the gateway to the life that they want to create. And so I feel deeply passionate about this, about the upside of uncertainty, because I believe that whatever situation you're in, you're going into retirement, you are stepping onto the frontier where you could do your best work. You are starting a business. That's the frontier where you could do your best work. You're stepping out of a business. Well, great. How do you reframe that as a frontier where you could do your best work? And all of this uncertainty, even the bad uncertainty in quotes that we wish we weren't facing. If you think about how do I make the most of this situation, that is so powerful. And I just got to return to Susanna's story about this moment where our son was, over medicated, deeply depressed. We had to be by him 24/7 because he might end it. We had to monitor him. And I remember so deeply the uncertainty of, I don't know how to help him. I don't know what to do. And there was this moment where we were by the ocean and I jumped in because it was hot. It was summer and I hear this splash and it's him. He's jumped in. At first, I'm so excited. Finally, he's gotten up and done something. But then he starts to swim and he swims past me and I follow him because I don't know if he's going to stop. That's how horrible it was. Now, luckily, he touched the buoy and he came back. And the next day, he did the same thing. And a few days later, he was eating this eggplant parmesan. And I took a photo and I just saw the hint of a smile. But in that moment, I could not see the possibility. And Susanna just kept saying, reframe, reframe, reframe. And luckily, I didn't screw it up. And luckily, he's with us still today. Not everyone is so fortunate. But now, I see the possibility that was hidden in that uncertainty. And it's that our son knows his parents love him, knows his father loves him, knows they will be there for him in his darkest moment. And that's a huge possibility. So I just encourage people to embrace these tools so that they can pull out the possibility in their life or their business or their career. I think it's really essential to creating the life and businesses that we want to have.
Well, you're leaving me speechless at the end, Nathan and Susanna. What a wonderful story. Thank you for your generosity in sharing that. It's deeply personal. And I just want you to know it makes a real difference. It makes a real difference. People are going to hear that. So great book. Nathan Furr, Susanna Harmon Furr, co-authors of The Upside of Uncertainty. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Money Talk Podcast, brought to you by TD Wealth, recorded on July 10th, 2025. The information contained herein has been provided by TD Wealth and is for information purposes only. The information has been drawn from sources believed to be reliable. The information does not provide financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. Particular investment, tax, or trading strategies should be evaluated relative to each individual's objectives and risk tolerance. TD Wealth represents the products and services offered by TD Waterhouse Canada, TD Waterhouse Private Investment Council, TD Wealth Private Banking offered by the Toronto Dominion Bank, and TD Wealth Private Trust offered by the Canada Trust Company. All third-party products and services referred to or advertised in this presentation are sold by the company or organization named. While these products or services may serve as valuable aids to the independent investor, TD Direct Investing or TD Wealth does not specifically endorse any of the products or services. The third-party products and services referred to or advertised in this presentation are available as a convenience to its customers only, and TD Direct Investing or TD Wealth is not liable for any claims, losses, or damages however arising out of any purchase or use of third-party products or services. The TD logo and other TD trademarks are the property of the Toronto Dominion Bank or its subsidiaries.